I mean, it's phenomenal to be able to share life, period, after something that takes you so close to death. I do think that Richard died on the table. And when that happens, I kind of woke up out of that thinking that, the way that he is now is, what do you say, every day is a bonus day?
Hello, I'm Andrew Schorr. Welcome to Cancer Friends. Here's my very best friend,
Esther Schorr.
Okay. And we've been married 37 years now and really enjoy the people we meet. And we thought it would be important related to cancer to talk about love. It's helped me, Esther.
Well, it's helped me too.
But we want you to be a couple we've come to know from Banff, Alberta, Canada, Richard Bandy and Sonya Lee. And they've been married, how long? 41 years?
41 years.
Wow.
Congratulations.
And you're so young looking.
Thank you.
Wow.
We were young and foolish when we got married. So,
right.
Yeah. So,
aren't we all?
So we have a lot to talk about. I'll just mention a couple of facts. And then, Esther, I know you want to really understand about the relationship. So they were living in Seattle. Richard, in 2000, was diagnosed with a very rare cancer with jelly belly, mucus all through his abdomen. And he ended up having surgeries and experimental surgery as well. But it also led to a complication where he lost his memory. So imagine that. And so maybe Sonya can talk about your perspective on this experience. And then we want to get to love, because it brought you back, Richard.
So, yeah. So I want to talk to Sonya for a minute. So as I understand it, Richard came out of his the trauma of all of this and didn't remember anything. And you had been married for a while already. Yeah. So as his partner and care partner, how did that impact you?
I think we'd been married for 19, 20 years when he had the surgery that caused the anoxic insult due to a bleed, which then caused a traumatic brain injury. Initially, when he was in the hospital, I would ask the doctors and nurses about what was going on, and they thought that it was just the medication that he was taking. And that's reasonable, when we have pain medications that are kind of diluting our ability to stay in touch with reality. But then after a period of a week, maybe even less than a week, it started to be clear to me that something was really different in his personality. He was extroverted and very verbal before the operation. He was really withdrawn, really emotional, and had, I know this sounds strange to say, but had kind of like an angelic sense around him. He was very innocent and almost like he'd been moved back to a childlike state. And that's when I started to ask lots of questions, when I realized that it wasn't just the drugs that were operating on him, something else was happening. And it set us out on a really different trajectory to find a neuropsychologist, get some testing done, go to a neurologist, see if we could find anything physical that was happening, and then eventually get this diagnosis that it was, he had both long-term and short-term issues with memory, meaning that he didn't remember a good majority of our past. I would say maybe one or two things was all that he remembered from before. And then he also had a difficult time creating memory and holding on to it. So we were in a really completely different situation without understanding how long it was going to take to resolve initially.
Okay.
Of course, I'm completely innocent also at that time about, well, maybe this will just take a year, to come back from not realizing the extent of the damage or what a real recovery was going to be like.
But in all of that, this is the man that you loved and love. So yeah. I'd love to hear what the two of you have to say about the bond you had. And now you're going to go through this other journey of essentially finding each other again, is what it sounds like. Mm-hmm. Talk a little, either of you.
Something about your experience
first. I will say that initially the first 6 months, or even the first year, I was such a neophyte, such a newborn sort of person, that I think I just kind of imprinted on Sonya as the person that loves me, and so I love her. I mean, there was very much that little baby bird sort of idea right off the start, and that continued for quite a while for me. I was so, my care was completely, Sonya was completely responsible for my care, put it that way. And so for me, she was everything to me. And it was years before I kind of had more of my independent thought sort of things, and was able to actually rebel against some of the things that were, maybe that I didn't agree with at the time, sort of things. But for years, it was just a matter of, I don't know. I mean, it was just, she was everything for me.
Well, she probably still is everything for you, yeah. But I would say then that Sonya, I know for Esther, when I was diagnosed with leukemia, that was pretty devastating. And when I was diagnosed with a second cancer, that added
was not fun.
Insult to injury. How did you cope, and how would you say love propelled you to sort of stay in the game? Because let's face it, there are people affected by cancer where someone leaves. You dove in.
I think, in brain injury, those statistics are fairly high. I think that, 60% of people where brain injury happens leave within the first year afterwards. There's just so much to cope with in terms of the personality changes. I remember running across a man who said his former wife left because he was breathing differently. Absolutely everything about the person changes. You're having a relationship with a completely new person. And we've talked with lots of people, lots of couples who've experienced brain injury in this regard. So I do think that love is the foundation that has to happen, has to be present to some degree in order to make that journey a sustainable one. But I think for me, particularly after I wrote a book about my experiences, wrote a memoir about what it's like to be in a relationship where this kind of thing can happen. And I think the thing that was most relevant for me was curiosity. In other words, I wasn't staying to be the good wife or to fulfill some type of a role of the caregiver. I was actually really authentically curious about who this person was. And I turned everything over to that curiosity. We'd had some good therapy training before Richard got a cancer diagnosis. I had experiences of my own identity changing radically in some ways throughout my life. But this was like really such a fundamental change to the relationship. I think it was good to have some of that grounding, to know how to work out conflict with each other, and how to turn towards each other and be curious about each other. So we just started from that place and worked from there. I also think, secondly, it was really fundamental for me to grieve in front of Richard, in front of this body of Richard, for the former man, and to not have that grief be personal to him, to the new him. So in other words, grief is real. He couldn't experience it because he didn't know his former identity. but he could feel compassion for me and also our children who were having the experience of relating to a different person and feeling loss. So we all just agreed in our family to tell the truth about these experiences. And I think that mattered a great deal. So there was love and there was honesty at the same time. And we kind of created this network, at least in our home, of us as kin able to re-knit together through expressing what we knew to be true about the situation.
Wow. Well, Richard, what awareness have you had of this process at the beginning? Not much, but
nothing initially.
But then as time went on here, Sonya was doing a lot of work. And it sounded like the kids too, trying to recapture a relationship with you. How did it become apparent to you that you had work to do and it was based on a long-term relationship?
I would say that there were issues that came up over the course of the years after the surgery, but the big thing was me reading her book. I read it before it got published, obviously, and I read every chapter kind of came in, and there were so many things that I had no idea that she had been involved with, that I was just totally clueless about. And even some of the past historical details from our early relationship that I'd completely forgotten about. So it was amazing to me to read the story and get an insight into what had actually gone on for us in years gone by and what was going on for us currently at the time of the writing. And that was amazing to me. Yeah.
And I can imagine how that would happen for you, Richard. You know, in just listening to the two of you, I realized that while absolutely not as traumatic a change in the relationship as you guys had, the evolution of any loving relationship as you get older, as there's a diagnosis like Andrew's had two of them, that I think you're right, Sonya, that there's a measure of grieving that goes on for former self or selves. And I think the way that love plays into all of that is if there's truly this loving relationship between two people, you have to be honest about how you feel about that loss, that it's not a personal thing. It's that something's changed. I mean, I probably haven't said this to you, Andrew, but just the fact that the two of us are getting older. You used to be a marathon runner. Now I run faster than you do. No, but I mean, that's not so because we love each other, those changes are things we talk about and we find some sort of an agreement about how we're going to proceed together. And I'm not sure that all relationships have that bond. And I think this is very special what you two have. And certainly I feel that about us.
The story, Richard, you told about reading the book where you're like one of the main characters.
You're the main character.
It's like, who is this guy? And you're
we would give him passages in the book and he would cry every time. This is your story. But he had, following the brain injury, had such a beautiful sensitivity about him. And it was so endearing to really not just me or the kids, just so many people. You know, and that was part of it. He was discovering his story for the first time. And that's a absolutely magnificent thing to be able to watch. And I had a background in this also because I got sober 25 years ago. And part of, you know, that kind of recovery is you become aware of all the ways your identity is radically changing. And he had to get used to that at that point. So there were just lots of changes that came about as a result of healing, but also writing about the book and sharing the book and getting a sensibility about what really happened here. The other strange thing I just want to say is that it was very unusual for me to see how he reacted to the book and what his awareness was about his own story. But then I had a later reaction, which was oh my gosh, what would have happened if I wouldn't have told him his story? Like, so he then attached to the memories, and then that's what becomes our personality, right? That kind of capsule of our identity that we show to the world. And I became curious about what would have been like if I had never shared that part of him. So in brain injury, you do have to rebuild a personality, or else you don't know how to engage with the world. Richard very much wanted to re-engage with the world afterwards. So, I felt a loss there too, as well. So we encourage that side of him to come forward as much as possible, the kind that the story that wasn't given to him, but the story that's emerging nonetheless. And I think that's a real gift in any relationship where there's a disease process and a healing process happening, is to give someone space to be who they are, even though you don't recognize where that history or where that shape of that story is coming from.
Wow.
So in a separate interview that I've done with Richard, he describes how he's gotten back to a lot of the physical activity he loves to do, some with you, hiking, biking, maybe you ski as well, things. So what's it like now to have this man back, or even a little different man, but have him back when you're out there doing one of these physical activities in such a beautiful setting where you live in Banff?
I mean, it's phenomenal to be able to share life, period, after something that takes you so close to death. I do think that Richard died on the table. And when that happens, I kind of woke up out of that thinking that, the way that he is now is, what do you say? Every day is a bonus day. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really matter what it is that we're doing. It really is something, even if it's a really crappy time, it's still, we get to have it together. And that feels huge to me. So, but yeah, living that close to the wilderness, being able to be in nature is really critical to my writing, critical to who I am as a human being. And we share probably so many more activities that we never shared before, because we had really busy lives, and this has involved a lot of slowing down and paying attention.
I think we're doing some of that too.
Yeah, change. True. Richard, so as you become aware over the years of this devoted relationship from your wife, as the cancer survivor, you have to kind of accept the love.
Yes.
So how did you get to that, from being childlike almost to being accepting and giving back?
It took me a lot of years. I would say 10 years after the surgery, possibly. I can't say exactly, but there was a point at which our relationship actually became mature enough again, where I could be curious about whether I loved Sonya as much as I loved her before. And I did. I mean, the love was obviously a little different, but there's no question that the curiosity actually became important to me as well. And I think Sonya would say the same thing, that her curiosity, she found that she fell in love with the new person, the new Richard, as much as I fell in love with her. And so I think that's been marvelous. I would say that we probably have had 4 different marriages over the course of our lives together, in terms of our personality changes and things that we've been through over the course of the numbers of years that we've been together. Yeah.
Then you probably each get a Nobel Peace Prize. Because one marriage has been enough for us. I'm not sure I could go through 4.
But maybe you need a new wedding celebration sometime,
We actually redid our vows a couple of years ago, just sort of thing, went up on a hike onto a lake and redid our vows just to kind of recommit ourselves to each other.
Beautiful.
How beautiful. Well, love, we believe in, plays a role as it can. Sonya, you said some people doesn't work when they're challenged with cancer in the family. I'm so glad it has worked for you. Thank you, Esther, that it works in ours.
Most of the time.
And hopefully this has been a story that people will remember. They'll look up your book. Now they know the main character, Richard, and it's really fascinating. We wish you well as you go on with your life that you have now. Maybe different in some ways, different people in some ways, but still with love is a tremendous bond. It's really beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you for asking us.
It's been our pleasure.